Well, that's great. Well, I really appreciate being given the chance to be the first speaker in your very interesting seminar this morning. I thought what I would like to do is I'd like to kick off by just talking about the big picture. And indeed, the big picture really is very big. I think a lot of people, even inside professional services, they don't really appreciate how gigantic the professional services industry is. Just to give us an example, I mean, professional services industry worldwide is about $7 or $8 trillion. And just as a comparison, that's about twice the size of the IT industry. And not only is the professional services industry quite a lot larger than the IT industry, it is growing a lot faster. In fact, the IT industry typically, if we just smooth out the humps and bumps caused by COVID, it grows at about 5% a year normally. Professional services grows at twice that rate. And that means that the professional services industry basically doubles in size every 7 years. The IT industry only doubles in size every 14 years. And as a comparison, the global economy, which typically grows at maybe 2% a year, that doubles in size every 24 years. So not only is it larger than the IT industry, it's considerably more dynamic. And just as a final, really interesting sort of comparison point, just take the four big accountancy firms who are a substantial part of professional services, but by no means dominate. Their revenues in a year are larger than the GDP of about 2/3 of the countries of the world. So just the big four accountancy firms together in a year is larger than the GDP of, say, Kuwait, or larger than the GDP of Morocco. So clearly, digital transformation of professional services has a huge impact, and has a huge knock-on impact, particularly on the clients and the industries they work on. And that's something that I'm going to be discussing as I move on through my presentation. Right, okay. So digital transformation in professional services, to me, comes in three tiers. And I've got them here as steps up, because that's sort of what they are. They are steps up in every stage of the place. So the first one is digital transformation of the work of an individual professional. And I've got some experience of this, because when I left university with my degree in computing in my pocket, actually what I didn't become a journalist or a commentator. Actually, I started a software company with some friends, and we produced software for architects. And this was in the very early days of digital transformation in professional services. And it's all about revolutionizing the productivity of the individual professional. So it is a revolution, but it's a revolution which is confined to their desk effectively. So I mean, you could see almost like the first example of this was actually Excel for many sort of in the accountancy auditing professions. I mean, it seems routine today, but actually, if you can imagine a life without Excel, you can imagine what a step up it must have been for these people to have access to this kind of tool, which came along in the 1980s. And then there's things like CAD software for architects. There's quite, you're all familiar with them, but they are leveraging the power and productivity of just the professional. What they don't do, however, is change the workflow or the structure of the industry. They're productivity enhancers, but they don't have an impact on the broader organization. So to me, if I was to take an example, it's like a carpenter buying an electric screwdriver. I mean, it doesn't allow them to create anything different. They can't create the Mona Lisa or the Eiffel Tower, but they sure can make the stuff that they're doing before, but they can make it a lot faster. So to me, that is level one of digital transformation. That is transforming the work. The next step, and that's when, to me, the big changes started happening, is when the digital transformation moves beyond the desk and moves into the firm, where you get transformation of workflow and processes. This often involves particularly internal collaboration, but sometimes external collaboration as well. You get things like in the legal profession, you get client portals, for instance, where instead of like emailing things backwards and forwards and everybody not being sure who's got the latest version of which document and things like that, everything's centralized in a portal, so that workflow is regularized, organized, everybody knows where they are, everybody knows the latest version of every document. I know that Microsoft has done a huge amount of work in the legal profession. It includes things like building information systems for architects. And one of the impacts of this, which is where it starts really creating a knock-on effect, is because this is the first time that professional services firms have been trying to drag their client into the sort of the digital age. When it was just the professional's own desk that was being digitally transformed, there's no real impact on the client except the stuff gets turned around quicker, which everybody likes, but doesn't really make a difference. But when professional services firms are transforming their own workflow, then that starts having an impact on the client. And I think this illustrates one of the really important parts about digitalization of professional services, which is the very important role that they play in catalyzing digital transformation in their clients. And I saw this with my own software firm, where we wanted to send people files instead of, actual sort of workable files instead of just like PDFs. And then the clients are sort of scratching their head, wondering like, "Oh, I don't know what this is. How do we don't download this additional software?" But it had a real impact on the client at the end of the day. It's pulling them forward, it's pushing them forward, but it's encouraging them to try things themselves and to re-look at their own processes. Of course, this has been massively enhanced and accelerated by the cloud, which just makes this kind of internal workflow transformation so much more straightforward. So much of this is about collaboration and new ways of working across disciplines, or within teams and geographically dispersed teams. I mean, you can do this without cloud, but why would you? I mean, really, it's just making a lot of work for yourself. I mean, the cloud is the thing that's really catapulted this forward. However, what you're delivering is fundamentally, it's kind of the same service. It's faster and it's delivered in a more collaborative fashion, but the service you're delivering is still the same service, and you would typically be billing it in roughly the same way. The third stage is where you're moving from transforming your workflow to transforming the whole way that the business is structured. And it's interesting to me that professional services firm, to me, were very quick to transform the work of their professionals, which is level one. They were pretty quick to transform their workflow, I think in many cases faster than their clients. But transforming their business, to me, this is the revolution which in many cases is still to come. A lot of professional services firms are still delivering very similar services to where they were. So what does transforming the business actually involve? So this involves like a complete rethinking almost of the firm's location in the value chain, where they extract value, how they give value to the clients, and how they interact with the broader sort of end product. I mean, you can see this in examples outside the professional services industry very clearly. I mean, one of my favorite examples is Volkswagen, which is no longer seeing itself as a company that produces cars, even though they do produce lots of cars and they're cutting edge and things like EVs. They see themselves as a problem-solving organization. It's about mobility. It's about getting people and goods from A to B. They'd like to do it by people buying their cars, but they're increasingly agnostic about how they deliver mobility, and how they sort of structure themselves, how they sell their products, ready for future models based on rental and driverless cars and all those things which are coming down in the future. It's very disruptive to any firm to sort of be part of this real transformation. People feel very nervous about it. A lot of the things that were considered as given are no longer the case. And we have to admit here, often the people at the head of any company, not just professional services companies, they're typically often in their 50s. They've done things a certain way. Sometimes it can be a challenge to change, but of course, in many cases, the future of the firm is at stake, and the change is needed. One of the things that is critical is increasingly professional services companies typically just sell brain power. Actually, I don't know why I said just. There's nothing just about brain power. It's the most important commodity we as a species, own is our brains, right? But they sell brain power, and increasingly they're moving to be selling sort of hybrid products. And you see that, for instance, in audit. Traditionally in audit, there's been a random sampling process where certain transactions are lifted out and given sort of scrutiny, because you can't obviously audit every transaction of a multinational, so they pick them out at random. But increasingly, auditors are using AI to establish which transactions should be picked out for manual review. And you can do that to try and really establish, rather than picking out at random, pick the ones which are going to be the tough cases, pick the edge cases, pick the ones which are going to really shine a light on internal procedures and show that the audit is truly robust. So what you're facing here often is professionals almost sitting next to an invisible partner, and the invisible partner will be powered by AI or machine learning, vastly enhance their own abilities as a professional, using brain power where it's needed and using technology where it's not. But also it's seeing sort of different ways of approaching problems. And one of my favorite examples actually comes back to sort of computer-aided design, which is, where I started many years ago, which is the example of generative design, where instead of a human being designing an item, whether it's it's a product or a girder or some sort of physical structure, the human being is involved in setting the parameters, like where are the load points of this structure, and what are the other sort of parameters, and just let the machine get on with the business of actually designing it, often using a very iterative process. And in many cases, machines design things that no human being would have ever thought of. Often these are structures which, when you look at them, they're really weird. And often they feel very organic. They're almost like sort of tree roots, but they're lighter and stronger than anything a human being could create. One of the issues here is that you might be involved in new charging models. There may be an element of risk sharing with the client. There may be atomization, which is that things that were previously sold under one umbrella may be sold as individual units. A good example of that is the legal profession. So the legal profession, you used to buy legal services from a legal firm. But increasingly, what's happening is individual legal professionals are atomizing under umbrella brands. So the umbrella organization will provide sort of shared services, including things like sort of the platform for document management and things like that. But the individual professional will effectively be a sort of a micro entrepreneur, looking after their own clients, finding their own clients, and working with other legal professionals where needed on a sort of semi-arm's length process, all facilitated by a platform. It completely changes the way that the legal services are delivered. It can be very much better for the client. They get a real feeling that they're dealing with a professional they know, and it's none of this business about, well, I thought I was dealing with Kevin and now I'm dealing with Sonia, and which some people have a problem with legal services. It's a completely different way of working. It's facilitated obviously by digital transformation. It's clearly facilitated by cloud. It's a very different form of organization of the legal profession than the traditional legal firm. And another thing which is, to me, is very interesting, and I've seen it in a number of professions, and architecture is one of them, is the use of open source techniques. Of course, this is common in software. I mean, some of the largest software companies in the world now use open source software and contribute to open source software. They don't see the loss of control as an issue. And you are seeing this in other professions, particularly in architecture and engineering. The most famous example in engineering actually is Hyperloop. So Hyperloop, I'm sure you remember, is one of Elon Musk's side projects. It's this idea of having, these tubes evacuated of air, snaking across the countryside and firing sort of capsules full of people or goods through them at speeds faster than a jet. And the idea being that you could go from, London to Edinburgh in, 35 minutes and things like that. There's a huge number of companies worldwide working on that. They're working on an open source basis. They're taking ideas out of the pool, they're improving them, and they're putting them back. And you see that also sometimes with architecture, where firms are, taking designs out of a pool again, changing it. Possibly some parts of it are proprietary, but some changes are not proprietary. And again, they're putting that back into the pool. It's a very different way of thinking about your expertise. It's a very different way of thinking about how you're adding value for the client. But again, it shows that traditional ways of thinking about business are breaking down. Of course, the people who are in the vanguard are the people who are potentially set up for tomorrow. There's no doubt about it. I mean, even though, as I say, to me, this third stage of digital transformation in many cases hasn't hit yet, there's no doubt whatsoever. Clients are looking for new ways of interacting with professional services firms, in a way, by introducing them to things like portals and new ways of working. You've whetted their hunger for change, and now they're wanting to see that change delivered They're wanting to see new flexible ways of working. They're wanting to see potentially risk sharing with professional services firms. What they're wanting to see, in fact, is the transformation of professional services as a business. I think that's my main thoughts on this. The only thing is I'd like to say, I mean, I've seen some of the speakers that are coming up later in the day. It's really fascinating, some of the things that you're going to be hearing about. I hope the conference goes really well.